Thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to spend time with Optiv today. The theme of our webinar today, which by the way, we are recording and you'll be able to get a copy of this later on shortly in the next few days, but we're talking about how to secure the game, defending against cyber threats ahead of the 2026 World Cup. And as we all know, for any major global event, there's always cyber threats. There's a surge in cyber threats that we see. So today, what we'd like to do is explore how actors exploit these large-scale events, sporting included, and unique risks that Canadian businesses will face. In addition to that, we want to spend some time talking about proactive security measures that all of you can look at to safeguard your operations, safeguard data, and of course your brand prior to the kickoff, which is in June 2026 in Vancouver and in Toronto. So I believe the dates are June 13th for Vancouver and the 12th for Toronto, although the final dates haven't been set out yet. So in terms of our panel today, so I'm Cheryl McGrath. I'm the Area VP and Country Manager at Optiv, responsible for the Canadian business. And so as most of you know, Optiv is uniquely positioned in a category of one when it comes to cybersecurity. So we uniquely combine best-in-class advisory service, managed services, as well as manage a network of technologies and implement technologies globally to over our 6,000 clients. We've been in existence for about 25 years, 10 years in Canada, and thank all of you that are clients of ours. So I will be the moderator today, and I'm delighted to introduce the two other panelists who have joined me today. One is Lena Dabbitt, the Executive Director and Office of the CISO here at Optiv. Lena came to Optiv after a 30-year career at the RCMP, and her roles included leading the air marshals. She did hostage negotiating. She was on the drug squad. She ran an interrogation group. But just prior to joining Optiv, Lena was the commander of the cybercrime investigative team for the RCMP, where she designed and implemented strategic initiatives to optimize operations and creates efficient, scalable workflows. She's a sought-after speaker in the Canadian marketplace and delivers thought leadership and keynote addresses to boards and to many of our clients. So, Lena, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sharon.
We also have Danny Pickens, who's the Director of Incident Management here at Optiv. And Danny has more than 2 decades of experience in the fields of military intelligence, counterterrorism, and cybersecurity. And throughout his career, Danny spent time at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels of intelligence and cyber operations within United States military and various other divisions of Department of Defense and other government organizations. As the director of our enterprise incident management team, Danny's responsible for all the direction and engagements that we do for our incident responders and intelligence professionals from both a proactive and a reactive incident management perspective. So thank you, Danny, for joining us today as well. Before we get started, I just ask everybody to put your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll get to those. We're planning to leave about 10 minutes at the end of this session to answer your questions. So please feel free to put them in the Q&A section. Okay, so let's get started. What do we know? We know that North America is expected to host about 50 million people for the World Cup. So we know that. We know that the complex infrastructure such as transportation, event venues, financial institutions, critical infrastructure, telecom will all be or could be targets, cyber targets. We know that they're all interconnected. So we know that every one of those systems is interconnected and, can cause multiple and potential points of failure and a potential ripple effect. So disruptions could cascade. So how do we address those things early? We've got 7 months before the games arrive here. What do we need to do? So with that, let's start with you, Lena. In your role at the RCMP, you covered many international events. And Why do these sporting events or attract cyber threats? And then part two, what are some of those examples that you have seen throughout your career?
No, thanks, Cheryl. That's a great question. I will say, on top of the usual challenge of complex logistics, supply chain, moving people, guarding against critical infrastructure threats, guarding against physical and digital security, I will say these games are going to be the most complex because this will be the largest games in the history of the World Cup. And that's because this is the first year that there is actually 48 teams, so 48 national teams instead of 32. So this is the first year that the expansion will actually take place. Additionally, this is the first time that the World Cup is going to be hosted across three countries. So you add that as a complex challenge. So already putting on an event like this is a significant draw on resources, protection, everything. Add to that now three different countries with three different legal sort of requirements, three different sets of privacy and regulatory controls, and you have a very, very complex um, set of events taking place against a hybrid threat landscape that is going to be significant. So I had to preface that because every time I think about the logistics behind it, I think, oh wow, this has potential to be really ugly. So let's go back to your first part where you asked about, why are sporting events like this or large scale events targeted? The reality is sporting events have been targeted long before cyber was cyber. They've always been able to attract people who want to disrupt them, embarrass the host country, if it's ideological in nature, get their message across. Because if you think about the way that it works and the sort of sabotage and propaganda that's gone back, that goes back to, even thinking it's not even all that far back, but the 20s to the 50s, you saw, early political, physical threats. The 60s to the 80s, you saw the rise of terrorism, political violence. And then in the 90s and 2000s, you still had, violence on a physical security level, but you started to see sort of of what the digitalization of everything around the games and what that means. So what that's done in essence is actually expand the threat surface significantly. However, with each set of games, it has grown exponentially. Each each games, whether they're World Cup or Olympics, you are seeing a greater and greater threat coming from multiple directions. So you look at like the 2020s, you really started to see that evolution of hybrid warfare and the AI driven misinformation and disinformation campaigns, influence campaigns. And they do this because if you think about it, in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, somebody would hijack a plane, you would have news on there, but really, unless you were watching the news and happened to have it be tuned in at, 10 o'clock at night, you really weren't going to be as aware of it. It would be on the radio, but it wasn't there and it wasn't as in your face, I guess is probably the best way to put it. But what's happening now is you're able to capitalize on how interconnected everything is. So you are able to have a much greater role in how you influence operations. You look at what they did to embarrass a lot of the threat actors and a lot of the campaigns, especially around, let's say, Paris 2024. You really saw the evolution of disinformation campaigns to embarrass the IOC, to embarrass France. There was over 18 different narratives that were being tracked. So it's a really big part of it. The other part, when you think about cyber and why it's so effective for threat actors, think of cyber like the pointy end of the spear. Cyber is almost your first point of contact. So if you can start to sow distrust, if you can target without even having to have threat actors on the ground, before, I hate to say it, if someone wanted to commit, something that would put them on the front page, you had to bring in, like, think 9/11. They had to learn how to fly planes, then they had to fly them into the buildings, but they had to physically be on the planes. The threats in this day and age no longer have to be on the planes. If you think of that as an analogy, the ability to cause significant impact and bring entire nations to their knees is very much a capability within the threat actor sphere. So that's the kind of things that we have to guard against. And I want you to when I think of cyber, so I will say in policing, one of the things we always were aware of is if you have a large scale event, you are drawing significant resources to it. So if you look at, and this is why I think, the World Cup is a real point of concern for me is you have two venues in Canada in two different parts of Canada. So they have to bring in enough security forces to be able to defend. Normally, with a large scale event, and the most recent one had been G7, there was police officers from across Ontario and Quebec who were moved to Calgary and Alberta, different parts of Alberta, to be able to help, conduct on the ground security. But what happens when you have two events in two of the biggest cities in Canada? So now you have to look at all the sort of the ripple effect and the periphery industry that could be impacted. Things like using it as a distraction. So this was a common thing in policing. You'd get suddenly this alarm at a bank or whatever, and everyone would go rushing over there, and then something happens in a different part of the country the city or the area you're patrolling. This can be no different. And the problem is threat actors not only work together, they don't even have to intentionally collaborate. If they see that someone is undergoing a campaign that they can capitalize on, they're going to piggyback onto it. So now everyone is focused on, let's say, Vancouver for one set of games, and everyone's focusing on the games themselves. What happens if they take down, a payment system? What happens if they take down a periphery retailer, transportation? Like the implications are huge. And so when we look at it as an example, and going to part two of your question, where have we seen this? So you look at, the Tokyo Olympics, the DDoS attacks at Tokyo and Brazil as well were significant. There was attempts even as far back as the London Olympics they had a 40-minute DDoS at London trying to disrupt the opening ceremony. Why? Because if you think about the image of the country and the nation that's doing it, that is significant. And if you're a threat actor, you want to use whatever leverage you can that is at your disposal. So if you interrupt a broadcast, and I love soccer/football fans. They're all very, very passionate. And if it's in the midst of a broadcast and someone takes down the teleco, and the broadcasting capabilities, that is significant leverage. So their chances of getting a ransom or getting someone to work with them or to try to compromise or find a way to get back up and running are going to be much more elevated than if they hit, at a different time. So it's just giving them a much greater landscape. You also see the ripple effect. And I do talk about I mentioned earlier about the ripple effects on periphery organizations, businesses. People said to me, I was in B-Sides last week and people were like, well, like I have nothing to do with the games. I'm not on a sporting betting platform. I'm not a teleco. I'm not broadcasting. Like, what does that have to do with me? But it does, because if you think about the scale and the volume of attacks that will come, anyone that even is remotely, even two or three removed, has the potential to be targeted just by simply being a Canadian entity. In BC, you have the ferries, you have transportation, you have the sky trains. All of those have the potential to be impacted, as well as CN Rail and Via GO trains here in Toronto. So I'll leave it at that. There's a lot there.
Oh, it's and you've talked previously about the Tokyo Olympics where there were targets for the athletes app so that they couldn't get to the events at the right time. So the threat actors from the country that caused the issue, their athletes would show up. So it's pretty ubiquitous, the threats to infrastructure, to the athletes themselves, et cetera. So, but how can we get prepared? So Danny, so for you, what do you think that you expect to see in terms of the threat landscape and the attack types for the World Cup?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl. So as Lena just pointed out, there's been a long history of physical digital threats to major global events. As she had mentioned, this is the largest World Cup, right? With the expansion, almost 25% more teams being involved, right? And it's passionately followed. I like that she used that name, that soccer enthusiasts, football enthusiasts are very, very passionate about that, right? So there's a passionate following by billions worldwide, right? When we look at this World Cup hosted, across North America, Canada, Mexico, the U.S., 16 major metropolitan areas, that are hosting events. This does open up a multitude of soft targets for malicious actors, right? So we don't not only anticipate, potential physical threats near the hosting sites, but also virtual threats in those areas, right? It's other targets such as sponsors, the teams, the players, spectators, and viewers online, or it was mentioned, mobile gaming, entertainment sites, are all targets of opportunity for malicious actors, right? When I look at sponsors and local hosting sites, right, I'm thinking hotels, restaurants, venues that can anticipate an uptick of denial of service attacks. You're going to see a lot of point of sale malware that can be introduced at all these different payment sites. You're going to see individuals being targeted on their mobile devices as well. Ransomware attacks against all of these different venues, not only just the hosting sites themselves where the games are being played, but all of the surrounding vendors, all of the surrounding places, right? Sponsors, viewers, individuals will see an uptick in phishing and smishing, right? So the difference between phishing via email, smishing via text messaging, right? A lot of those are gonna happen. It was again previously pointed out when you see large events like this, they're just targets of opportunity. So phishing and smishing will utilize FIFA, will utilize World Cup, will utilize different teams' names. Celebrity players' names to grab the user's attention to kind of push them more towards clicking on something bad, right? And introducing some type of malicious content onto their mobile device, onto their personal computer, whatever it is. When I look at the critical infrastructure that's going to be targeted, Lena talked about several different pieces of critical infrastructure around the sites there in Canada, absolutely going to be targeted, not just by nation state actors, but by really entrenched cyber criminals. Again, we might even see something similar to what we saw during the UN General Assembly just a few months ago. We saw this in New York, to where there was an attempted attack that was thwarted by the U.S. Secret Service, where several devices were discovered within a 35-mile radius, mind you, right? Not just inside New York City, but within that 35-mile radius of where those UNGA meetings were happening. I believe, if I remember correctly, there were about 300 different co-located SIM servers with more than 100,000 SIM cards that were going to be used to disable cell towers, intercept communications, provide encrypted communications for any threat actors that were operating locally. Given the potential for not just the celebrities that are going to be showing up, but you're going to find world leaders that are coming in to support their teams, not just from the hosting nations, but other world leaders that are coming in to support their teams. You're going to see most likely a large attempt at something similar, right? From either nation state adversaries or, again, well-entrenched cyber criminals that will not only pose physical threats, but digital threats out there. So the threat landscape is going to be vast. Even if you're not directly involved in the games themselves, you are still a target because you're operating locally. Lena, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add on that, some of the examples that you might have seen in your past with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, either on a physical or a digital side, somewhat similar to, the UNGA threat that we saw here recently.
Yeah, no, and you make an excellent point about, the VIP side. So in any large scale event, you are going to attract celebrities, you are going to attract, politicians. Just on their own, those are a significant logistical lift in complexity. I experienced that firsthand when I was running the Air Marshal program under protective operations. That alone is a significant piece. But what happens when someone now has the ability where, let's say it's a nation state where someone maybe doesn't travel that much outside their own country and now they're in a different country? What possibilities does that open? And yeah, is it a rabbit hole? Maybe, but I also am not a fan of I'm not a fan of coincidences or opportunities that get capitalized on, because for nothing else, whether they're nation state, cyber criminals, whatever, you are going to see them take advantage of opportunity. So if suddenly you have a world leader or a known international figure that comes, that also is going to have a significant load on your security forces on the ground. And I mean, I don't in Paris, I think they had anywhere from 30,000 to 45,000 gendarmes per day. So imagine trying to bring together that many police officers into one place. So you have that whole sort of domino effect of who's security, and then if you have to bring in additional security, who's vetting them, who are they, what are we looking at? You have this whole volunteer army that really is the backbone of any large game. So what's your threat vector there? That possibility of insider threat. And I do know that, as we were talking about all the different ways that can be attacked, they vet they only allow maybe 10 to 15% of those that apply to be volunteers. But how robust is that vetting? What type of vetting? What are these people being responsible for? And all it takes is one potential insider, whether it's physical, or digital, that could really like have a significant impact on the games themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And
and
also,
even on top of that, right? When you look at insider threat is a whole new ball game. But
Right.
we've also seen instances in the past where there's been um, new malware that was developed specifically for any type of event, right? You got the Olympic malware that happened quite some years ago. I'll touch again really quickly on gambling sites, right? Because that's a big thing down here in the States now, where it's growing from state to state, where you see different online betting apps that are out there, right? When those were first introduced, a lot of the things that we saw were just account takeovers, right? So not only just disrupting the ability from a denial of service attack for users of the applications and the gaming sites to use it, you see the other angle of it to where, adversaries are getting there, taking over the accounts of the users, to pull whatever credits they have, whatever the money they have, and they're out of there, right? So you can look at disruption, then you look at theft, right? So there's multiple motivations that adversaries are going to have on multiple different types of platforms, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And
also,
and and
there's
oh,
also
sorry.
AI related risks as well, right?
Yeah.
Deep fakes and disinformation as well that we have. So there's a lot of concern and things to worry about as Canadian businesses and individuals as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was going to add that, we talk about, nation state, and we talk about, really sophisticated threat actors, and they will absolutely be in there. Not I don't doubt for a second they're going to capitalize on, but you also have to look at your sometimes not so great criminals, but who have access to things like AI to make them these really good criminals. They pay a subscription service, and now they're able to impact your point of sale. They're able to set out malicious, they set up malicious Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi, log in here. That is going to be all over the place. So you look at businesses and individuals. Yes, on an individual level, you have it. But what happens if you're an employee of a business and you're there and you're just like, oh, I can't get a cell. I'm just going to log in through here. And now you've logged in, while you're at work or through a work device. So things that people may not be thinking about firsthand, but do need to think about.
Yeah, I hate to say the terminology, but it's like a playground, right? So,
Yeah.
you're going to see fly-by-night operations from, let's say, lower skilled adversaries. You'll see more targeted, intense operations by cyber criminal organizations, and then you've got the nation state sponsored threats that are going to be heavily involved as well, right? So it's just a very wide and ranging landscape that organizations really need to be prepared for.
So
100.
so lots of things to worry about, lots of individuals and that are going to be threatening our businesses here. So, Danny, we've heard you talk a lot about left of boom and what are the actions around what we can do to build out a cyber resilience program. So maybe you can describe for our audience today what left of boom means when you talk about that, and then also what would you recommend or some of the things that we can think about steps to prepare ahead of time?
Sure. Sure. So when I talk about left of boom, it's really on the security team is where those activities are concentrated. When I say boom, that's when the bad things happen, right? Malware's deployed, malware's detonated, unauthorized access is gained, data is getting staged for exfiltration, right? But left of that, when you look at a timeline, and that's really what left of boom means, is what's happening in that timeline all the way up until bad things are detected. So there's several activities that organizations should be conducting and should be done prior to that type of an attack taking place. This is really strictly about incident preparedness, right? And the proactive measures that we want to take as security professionals and security organizations that are really essential for a CISO, a deputy CISO, a director of security to understand their position and being able to identify gaps in policy, technology, detection capabilities. So when I look at activities that I would take in that position in a left of boom position, especially looking at something as large as and as wide as an attack surface that these adversaries that we were just talking about having is how old is my incident response plan, right? When is the last time that my plan and my playbooks have been reviewed and updated? Does that include a restoration and recovery plan? And are those current? Do I have a crisis communication plan in place that my executives and other business units are familiar with and have access to or are knowledgeable about? From a technology perspective, are my backups sound and immutable? Do I have conversations with my third parties? How prepared are my third parties that are supporting my business, whether it's a managed security provider, a managed IT provider, outside counsel, cyber insurance firm? Do I have crisis communication firms on retainer as well that can come in and assist in the event that something happens? When's the last time I conducted a red team exercise to understand positioning? Have I included a purple team exercise so I can see both the red and the blue side of it? If I were in that position, between now and when the World Cup happens, right, we've got some runway, right? I'd be looking at conducting a few different tabletop exercises, right? I want to test out a couple of different scenarios that we've talked about today, right? I want to test out a ransomware. I want to test out an insider threat. I want to touch, if I'm a retail organization, either in food and beverage, hospitality, direct resale and retail. When's the last time that I've exercised a point of sale breach, right? When somebody gets inside of my point of sale system and really attacks that. When's the last time I tested an actual network outage or a distributed denial of service attack? And what is my response there? If I'm utilizing technology to assist, such as a Cloudflare and Akamai or something, am I having conversations with those partners to understand their positioning and their preparedness for this? And preparedness is great, right? Because when we talk about when we're preparing for a major event like this and getting super focused, we want our teams to be primed. We want our teams to be confident in their roles and responsibilities. And when you're reviewing your plans, you're reviewing your playbooks, you're conducting tabletop exercises, you're identifying gaps through penetration tests and purple team exercises, that's going to really imbue confidence in the teammates because people are going to understand what is my role, what is my responsibility, right? And it's the same with folks that aren't necessarily involved in the cyber security aspect of their job day to day, right? When you've got the C-suite, when you got board of directors, when you got business unit leaders that, their day job is not cybersecurity, but something large happens, all of a sudden their day job does become cybersecurity. And they need to be confident in their decision-making capabilities and what decisions will be put in front of them when something happens. And so they need to be brought in to these exercises as well so that they can feel comfortable and knowledgeable in the decisions that they have to make. Whether it's, hey, we're hosed so bad, I got to take down the network for a limited amount of time. But if I do that, how quickly can we recover from this, right? So that they're confident in that decision and they're prepared. They have the knowledge, they have the training, and they're really just ready to go. I know Lena's participated in a lot of these types of exercises. Tabletop exercises aren't a cybersecurity only thing, right? I can think back on my time, a couple of decades ago where we were running tabletop exercises, going over different, operational plans when we were getting ready to conduct operations overseas, right? That's really where tabletop started, right? You get the map in front of you, if the red guys are there, the blue guys need to go here, and we need to be prepared to do that. And how far can their artillery reach, and how do we take that out with the air attack before we move ground troops in, right? So those are the decisions that need to be made, from a military operations standpoint. But it's the same thing that happens here, right? And that's why those tabletop exercises are so important because when we go in and we conduct tabletop exercises for our clients, we set up a lot of rules just at the beginning, just to make people comfortable, right? This isn't a got you moment. This is a training moment, right? This isn't we're going to come in and point out all the things that you're missing, but it's an opportunity for you to understand what that position is, right? Don't poke holes in a scenario. This isn't a gotcha moment. This isn't a point fingers moment at somebody because they weren't prepared. This is a learning environment, right? This is how we get prepared so that people are, again, confident. They trust their decision-making capability. And if a gap is found, great. Now we know what that gap is, and we can create policy, we can introduce technology, and we can train to fill that gap, right? Lena, anything that you would like to add on that, ma'am?
No, that's a great summary, and I love that you talked about preparedness and really tabletop exercises, crisis simulations. They've been around. I was an incident commander for in the policing side. When you're talking about things like plane crashes, natural disasters, major crisis, terrorist attacks. But fun fact, I was also in the infantry before I joined the RCMP. So it's sort of you're speaking my language, Danny. But I will say, you made some excellent points. One of the things I have seen is so there's a couple of things when you are doing tabletops, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, where sometimes you have your executive, they do a tabletop and they're really good at it, and everybody has it down to a science. Everybody knows exactly what they're going to do. Nobody's told the IT and security team what their roles are going to be, and they do it independent. So I would recommend when you are doing these exercises, make sure you have different people involved so that everyone knows what their expectations are. Because I've seen that happen a few times. The other side of it is, everyone does a tabletop or a crisis simulation on Wednesday morning when everybody is there, all the decision makers, and these are the people who are going to, this is what they're going to do when it's going to happen. I can guarantee you when it does happen, an incident, it will not happen on a Wednesday morning when your entire security team and IT team is there. It's going to happen. And statistically speaking, you have a 30% more chance increase of being attacked on a weekend. I mean, you guys are going into Thanksgiving. So am I expecting, your incident response teams to be busy this weekend? Yes, I am, because statistically speaking, that is when it's going to happen. And the holidays are coming up. And so an event like FIFA is going to have that, like we talked about earlier, we talked about, that the leverage of having an attack happen, in the middle of a game or, the middle of a big event. But the likelihood is it might happen at 3 o'clock in the morning, and who's left? Who is basically going to be the decision maker? Do they know that they're the decision maker? Do they know what the expectation on them is? And some people are like, well, I'm waiting for, so-and-so to come in because they always make that decision. But you're the decision maker. So how do you empower your teams to be the decision maker, to feel confident? And I love that you use that word, because people need to feel confident in their decision making capabilities and how they implement and what it looks like. I will say the other thing is, looking at the lead up to the games, is how are you sharing information and revisiting? Like I've been on a couple of tabletops recently where, people are pulling up the playbooks and, oh, well, that guy left in, 2019 and that one left in, whatever, because no one's updating them. So you're putting yourself at risk unnecessarily, as far as I'm concerned, because it doesn't need to be that. Additionally is understanding who to call, when to call. Do you know, when you look at your playbook, who are you going to reach out to? Is it who's your police of jurisdiction? All those things you really need to think about well in advance. So when you talk about proactive, don't wait till a crisis to start Googling and find out what jurisdiction you're in to understand which police department it is or which, law enforcement agency it is, because that's not like, you can do all this in advance and understand that. So, I mean, I will say that's probably a really big thing. I just want to go back to a point that you made, and I thought that was really important. We were talking about, insiders and supply chain around something as basic as food. Everyone thinks, well, it's food. Like, it's not, food isn't going to make the world blow up, but it will have a significant impact. So after having been in a number of large events, I can tell you the food and care and comfort of your people, of your teams, of your security teams if they are so focused on wondering if anyone's going to bring them food or if anyone's forgotten when they're guarding some distant doorway or a fence, a barrier, and they're wondering if anyone's going to bring them food, I can guarantee you their mind is not on what their role is and what their protection is because they're wondering if they're going to get food or if it's raining. Have you properly equipped people to be out in the conditions? And that sounds like such a small piece, but it's not because you look at something like, and, going back even historically to like Napoleon, and his ill-fated, incursion into Russia. Yes, he didn't take into account in the weather, but as they were retreating, within about 3 days, they had no food, and now all of a sudden you have complete disorder. There was mass disobedience. His military was in tatters when they left. And yeah, that's a really extreme example, but what happens if you have people working and that is not unusual in these type of events to have security people working 12, 15, 16 hours a day, multiple days in a row. I can tell you, been there, done that in more than one occasion. And I know that still happens because you have to factor in logistics. So if you can take care of your people, your security teams, you also take care of their role. They know that they can focus on their role.
No, I love that. I love that we've gone into the aspects of the leadership that's part of this as well. Yeah, and at one point in time I did have hair, right? And over the years as I've grown and come into my leadership capability, not anticipating the small needs that are necessary as worn as wear, right? But it's I think it's great, right? When I look at it, and we can have the conversation around leadership. I always have four principles of leadership that I try to one mentor my managers on, but stress down to the different folks in my team, right? And number one for me is troop welfare, right? How am I taking part of the team, right? One of the great things, and I'll kind of brag a little bit on Optiv is the snack situation that we have in the break rooms. I can go back there and get some Kraft macaroni and cheese if I need to, right? It's been a long day. I'm stuck in meetings all day, but that stuff is there, right? Or just little bags of peanuts, things like that. Always coffee, always water. Making sure that happens, right? Because then you lead into my principle number two, which is mission accomplishment, right? Take care of your people, they're going to take care of the mission, and then have a standard, right? So when we're talking about the standardization of what we're doing, it goes back to another point that you made. How often am I reviewing and refreshing my plans and my playbooks? Because, somebody's left and moved into another job, they've retired, they've moved on, you've created a new role as your organization has grown. Constant updates need to happen with the policy documentation that we have. So that should absolutely be a part of any type of preparedness activity, right? Not just the exercising of it, but what are the documentation and the policies that we have, right? Because when something bad happens, and I tell this to my guys all the time, when we get that phone call on the hotline, be prepared to talk to somebody that's having the worst day of their professional career, right? And a lot of times, if we're not prepared, we're not ready, we're not exercising these things, I don't have fresh documentation, people go into panic mode, right? And the what we want to be able to have ready and preparing ourselves for these is to make sure that we're not making decisions based off of fear, but we're making decisions based off of well-exercised documentation, policies, and decisions that need to be made.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the theme that we've talked about here is practice, right? So it's interesting tie-in to football, soccer, where professional athletes, professional musicians, professionals continually practice. They just don't go and play a game or play their instrument or go into a concert. They practice. So, best practices that we see at Optiv are clients that exactly do the things that you and Lena have been talking about continually practice. What's worst case scenario? You made a point as well, Lena, about, who's your police of jurisdiction. So, we've often been asked can we help? And we do introduce clients to the cyber team in a particular city or province or municipality and meet them ahead of time so that they can help. Now, I know, Lena, there's often organizations are concerned about, is the police department going to, do something that's going to cause a bigger issue, which is absolutely not the case. They're there to help and log. And if there's issues that they've seen elsewhere, they're going to bring that expertise to you and help you there. So anyway, just a theme of practice and it's imperative for sure for these games. We talked, Lena, we talked a little bit about who's most at risk, the organizers, telecoms, et cetera. Are there there's some individuals on this call as well, just from a perspective of the fans, what can they do? You mentioned, access to Wi-Fi, et cetera. Is there anything else in terms of risks and business considerations around, anybody beyond the organizations you've just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects to this. We talked about payment services, we talked about retail, we talk about even corporate sponsors. Like just being a corporate sponsor in an event like this is going to make you a target. You're just naturally going to be a target. So something that seems as crazy as targeting Kia and Hyundai because they are the official fleet of the games. It sounds so out there, but I can guarantee you they're going to see an uptick in their attacks because that's just how it works, unfortunately. As soon as you are tied to it in any way, shape, or form, I will say your third party is going to be a risk. Um, so on this, funny enough, I was just reading an article this morning that popped up, and it's something that I was talking about to actually some of our clients a couple of months ago about that consideration of physical and cybersecurity and understanding what it means. So what if someone has the ability to turn off, and everything's so interconnected? What if someone has the ability to, if you have a warehouse, find out where the warehouse is, enable a threat actor to get in there, unlock doors remotely, access items. And sure enough, this morning I was reading an article where you are seeing large fleet trucks, the big trucking containers that we see all the time on the highways. And they are remotely being hijacked. Their GPS, they're able to figure out where they are. And now you have threat actors finding out where the trucks are and stealing entire trucks full of electronics. Apparently, there's a market in energy drinks that are illegal in other places. I mean, I don't know, because can you picture me on an energy drink? That's just scary. But all that to say is there is a lucrative market out there to be able to hijack. And again, by their very nature, criminals are opportunistic and they're going to take advantage of every opportunity that they have. So what you're seeing is that trucks, like a whole truck is being hijacked by cyber criminals and then they go in. Additionally, when you look at risk, we did touch on VIPs, but it is something to think about from information that is out there. There was another instance, and I bring this up because to me, I think that's really alarming. And it happened in right near the Mexican border, I believe. And the cartel hired a hacker to they found a phone number for one of the Department of Justice, one of their attorneys, and they hacked into his phone, uses geolocating, and then hacked into the CCTV cameras. So again, you think of CCTV cameras will be in use everywhere at the games. So someone actually hacked into the CCTV cameras and then followed this attorney, a Department of Justice attorney, as he went and met with witnesses, and they were witnesses obviously in high-level drug trials, and then they killed the witnesses based on where he was and he met them. Like it's again, like there's no limit to the innovation, but those are the kind of things you need to think about. And then you go back to there's people that are going to be at the games. Are you going to be able to track people at the games? Do you have, how secure is your CCTV systems? Like all of these are there, but they're all part and parcel of the risk. So if your CCTV camera systems are all, done by a third party somewhere in that chain, who's protecting that? How is it being protected? Who's protecting the information that's in there? I will say my last point on that though is about, we talk about data governance and privacy. In speaking to some organizations that are working, especially in critical infrastructure, there's a concern about the handling around like fan information, customer information. And we know, again, three countries, three different sets of rules. So if you collect information in Canada, is that going to be used for the same purpose in the US or Mexico, and vice versa? Is information collected in the US going to be used in the same way? So there have been some significant challenges in that space, but how do you protect it when it is across three countries like that?
Exactly. Danny, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think she hit it well, right? But again, when we look at, who are the high risk sectors and businesses, right? She named off several, but again, I'll go back to even if you're just the hot dog cart, right?
Right.
Outside of the stadium, right? understand what that looks like, but extrapolate that to being larger organizations in and out, right? So we're looking at sponsors, we're looking at retail vendors, right? And my point of contention is really just on those that are one really largely benefiting from having so much traffic, foot traffic, so to speak, to their business that just puts you know, puts target on their back, right? Retail stores, restaurants, hospitality, your hotels and things like that, um, taxi companies, ride shares, and then expanding critical infrastructure that maintain the stoplights in and out from the crosswalks, communications, networks in the local area, banks with ATMs that are located in and around the venue, right? ATMs, right? Huge target, for those that are trying to pull cash before they go into a stadium, or pull cash before they go to dinner, to ensure that you tip your waitress and waiter, right? With ATM skimming and type malware that might go in there, or even devices, right? You don't look away from those physical devices that can be put on point of sale machines and ATMs as well, gas stations, petrol stations, things like that, right?
Exactly. So always be diligent. That's certainly the theme. Um, so at this point, unless Lena and Danny, you've got other things that you wanted to discuss, I think we'll open it up for questions from our audience. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we go to our audience?
I think that the last thing that I'll put out there, right, and it's nothing that we haven't already covered. But again, get left at boom, right? Review and refresh your policies. Have a conversation with your third party and supply chain providers that you have that support your business. How are they preparing? How are they going to support you if something happens? Internal user education, right? We talked about training the security team, looking at your policies, go through. I know we're past October, right? We're past International User Awareness Training Month, but run some simulations with your user base, do some phishing tests to see what your click rate is, get the education out there to those users, and then partner with your providers like Optiv to run those purple teams, those tabletop exercises, policy review or creation if it's non-existent. And the ones again that we want to talk about: incident response plan and playbooks, business continuity and disaster recovery playbooks, crisis communications, and then make sure you have solidified points of contacts for your providers, whether it's a retainer for IR, retainer for legal, retainer for crisis communication, and who your point of contact is at your cyber insurance carrier.
That's right. I mean, really, how do I even add to that? That was excellent. That was a great summary of all the things that have to be done, Danny. Like that's a tremendous list. I think my only message really is don't think that you're so small that you won't get hit. Or that no one's really paying attention to you because you're not directly involved with FIFA. We are going to see some significant influence campaigns. We're going to see some significant attempts to embarrass our country because again, why wouldn't someone take advantage of that? We see the rhetoric out there already. It's just going to get worse. And so just take the steps to guard yourself. And if nothing happens, great, it worked. But if it doesn't, then at least you have prepared and you have an idea of what you need to do.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you both very much. All right, we've got a couple of questions here. The first one is from Newman Lim. Thank you, Newman. So the question is, we see drones change the landscape of war and lower barriers for the bad guys. What do we see about how we can fight these threats? Danny, maybe I'll ask you first if you've got some comments about drones.
Yeah, we've seen an uptick in that stuff, right? When you look at the Ukraine-Russia conflict, you've seen it in the Middle East as well, right? Where drones are being launched internationally and used as weapons, right? Attacking armored vehicles, attacking, troops that are out there. When I look at major metropolitan areas and how they defend against drones, and I'm sure Lena has a lot of experience this as well with what she's done, right? But there's air traffic is going to be shut down and closely monitored, right? That are coming in. There's levels to this, right? On how close they allow certain things to get to the ground, depending upon what type of an airframe you are, whether you're a small drone airframe, up to rotary wing, up to fixed wing. to curb that, air traffic control has capabilities to jam those. There's going to be ways to take those down. There's going to be ways to really ground them and one, jam them from getting into a certain area just with the different frequencies that they can use. There's going to be monitors for that. I think from a drone perspective, it's a great question. I don't know how many are going to be allowed. I don't know how, you know, Canadian law enforcement monitors that, so to speak. A little American over here, but you know, I think the jamming technology that's out there is going to do a lot to kind of curb a majority of the drones are going to be able to get into that space. Um, I don't know, Lena, anything that you want to add onto that from your perspective and your experience more with the law enforcement background?
Yeah, no, definitely great question. You do see that, so I will say, things like the airports have been implementing technology against drones for a number of years. I've sat on several security committees around air safety. And so that has always been a thing. You are seeing it more and more. I will say the most recent, uh, large event in Canada was the World Cup, the World Series. I knew it had a world in it. It was the World Series, and there was very specific rules around it. And I do believe a couple of people did get charged, but they have it so that you can't even get remotely close to it. Uh, you're absolutely correct. Now, does that mean that a threat actor determined enough can't get in there? Yeah, but I will say that law enforcement is prepared. Law enforcement also has their own drones. I don't know of any law enforcement agency that doesn't have drones in this day and age. I mean, they're a very effective tool, and it's not just used by the SWAT teams. It's used by control, like a very well trained operators for sure.
Great, thank you. Newman also provides some assistance here, telling us not to use the word louver as the password for the CCTV system. Thank you.
That is
Also,
great.
Vikas from Halton Police says if you're in that region, please reach out. They're happy to have a conversation as well. So thank you very much for that, Vikas. Another question that came in from Mahmoud is asking about, with heavy reliance on volunteers at FIFA, how are we prepared to vet these people and any unexpected security or digital threats? What's happening in terms of how we're managing the volunteers? Lena, what would you say to that?
So I will say that again, it's only about 10 to 15% of volunteers that apply will actually be vetted and allowed in. I do believe it was Paris where they red flagged 5,000. So 5,000 of the people that applied to be a volunteer at the Paris Olympics were not allowed, and that means that they were either considered a national security risk, a criminal risk, some type of risk enough that they were vetted. So that was very reassuring. Now, I mentioned earlier, do we have enough police to be able to do this effectively? No. I believe in Paris, they had over 100,000 of their military personnel. In Canada, we have very strict rules about how we use our military personnel, and they can't be used against Canadians, which is fair. I mean, that is how we have it here, but that doesn't mean that we aren't using them. So what do they do? Primarily, in my experience, how the military does get used, they get used for things like if they're helping set up with logistics, with housing, food. They may work on a distant barrier where they're not the security staff, but they are supporting the security staff in some way, shape, or form. So we do have that ability to draw on. What training? The likelihood is you will have large private security firms that will be called on, is what I expect. So things like Garda World, any of the entities that already have staff that are already trained and vetted, are going to be bringing them in to do some security. Do I expect that a lot of people are going to get recalled? I hope not. Yes, I was so happy that I retired because I didn't have to do this because it is going to be nuts. But again, like, where are we going to get the bodies? We are going to have volunteers that are going to take them on, but I anticipate that it will be a couple of seasoned, highly trained officers who are be in charge of any particular group, and then other people maybe part and parcel of like perimeter, door guarding, athletes village, that kind of thing. And it will depend on the level of security, right? Like an exterior perimeter fence, let's say near a body of water, is not going to need the same, security as something close to where you're going to have the athletes village, politicians. So there's going to be different degrees of security, and that always gets factored in as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Um, that was actually, there's one more question that came in earlier and it's not on the list here anymore. But Danny, how should companies prepare for a potential DDoS attack during FIFA?
Yeah, when we look at, infrastructure attacks, we look at network attacks and looking at outages. I think a good approach is to really look at traditional defense in depth, right? What we call layered security, right? Relying on the technology that you put in, or relying on your failovers. For the mitigation aspects of it, a good, strong technology-based approach for anti-DDoS protection, such as cloud-based distributing traffic, as Cloudflare, Akamai, or others that do that, right? Have that in place. Again, have conversations with them on what your traffic rate should be. How should I be distributing the traffic that's coming in? What is my threshold? How am I monitoring that? What technologies do I have in to monitor that? Your load balancing, your failover systems, and just at the end of the day, if those fail, just go back to your policy and your plans, right? Be knowledgeable and ready to execute any business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans that you have. But DDoS is such an aged attack. There's a lot of things out there that organizations already have in place, but revisit what you have, revisit those partners that you have conversations with them, understand what your thresholds are, understand what your policies and plans are.
Great, thank you. Lena, anything to add to that?
No, that's excellent. I mean, it's so frustrating when you're right in the midst of it. But being prepared for it in advance and anticipating, I think, is probably your best goal. But I mean, Danny nailed it.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Well, that is the last question that we see in the Q&A. I wanted to thank everybody for joining. Thank you to the panelists as well. And as I've heard Lena say before, these are her words. She says, protecting the integrity of global events like FIFA is more than protecting sport. It's an opportunity to showcase how integrating all aspects of security creates stronger, resilient companies and nations. So via Lena. Thank you very much. So as I talked about up front, so Optiv is the leader in cybersecurity. We have over 2,500 cybersecurity specialists. And our call to action today is, please be prepared. We talked about practice. We can certainly help you with whether it's, planning and building any resilient programs tied to the World Cup. Whether you need incident response retainers, pen test, red teaming. We heard about purple teaming as well, tabletop exercises, as well as other services. So please call on us. We can also help with other requirements such as securing AI for those that, over and above, obviously, what's required for FIFA. So thank you once again for investing your time with us today. We really appreciate it. And this webinar, as you know, has been recorded. We will be posting it on our website shortly. So thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your time and energy hearing from us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.